The hinges screamed as Elena Carter pushed open the frozen cabin door. Snow swept in like white fire, stinging her cheeks. In one arm, she held baby Iris, only 8 months old. Beside her, Tommy, small, shivering, and brave, clutched her worn coat. Behind them, the Carter family stood watching, their luxury cars gleaming like silver snakes against the snow. Roderick Carter laughed first. "Behold, the grand inheritance, $1 worth of glory." His wife adjusted her fur collar, sneering. "Maybe she can rent it out to ghosts." Elena said nothing. Her breath came in clouds, her eyes hollow but steady. At her feet, Valor, the German shepherd her late husband had trained, growled low, a warning carried on the wind. They thought they had buried her future here, in this ruin. But what waited beneath that cabin would bury their laughter instead. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments below. Snow blanketed the Montana wilderness, a white stillness broken only by the whisper of wind sliding through the tall pines. The air was sharp enough to sting skin, the kind of cold that bit through wool and bone alike. Elena Carter stepped out of the old blue pickup truck and exhaled a cloud of breath that vanished into the gray sky. She was 35, tall and slender, her frame almost fragile beneath a heavy brown coat. Wisps of chestnut hair escaped her wool scarf, brushing against a pale face that carried the quiet exhaustion of someone who had been too brave for too long. Her gray-green eyes, once lively, now dulled by grief, reflected a mixture of fear, resolve, and something deeper, the need to survive, no matter how cruel the world had become. In her left arm, she cradled baby Iris, barely 8 months old, wrapped in a faded pink blanket. Iris had her father's eyes, soft brown with a spark that made Elena's chest ache every time she looked at her. At her side stood Tommy, 8 years old, small for his age but wiry and bright-eyed. His tousled dark hair poked out from under a knitted hat, and his gloved hand gripped the strap of a worn backpack that carried all that remained of their life. Tommy was a quiet boy, but observant, the kind who listened to the world before he spoke. Garrett, his father, had taught him that silence was sometimes braver than shouting. Beside them padded Valor, their German shepherd. He was 6 years old, his thick sable coat dusted with snow, his amber eyes sharp and intelligent. The silver tag on his collar read, "Garrett's Valor." Once trained as a military service dog, he had been Garrett's companion during deployments overseas and later, after retirement, his shadow at home. When Garrett was killed in a highway accident 2 years earlier, Valor had refused to leave the front porch for 3 days. Since then, he had become more than just a dog. He was Elena's sentinel, her guardian, and the last living piece of the man she had loved. Behind them, a line of expensive SUVs idled on the dirt road, exhaust curling into the frozen air. Inside one, Roderick Carter, Garrett's older brother, laughed loudly. He was in his mid-40s, tall and broad-shouldered, with a face hardened by corporate arrogance and the kind of charm that hid cruelty well. His beard was perfectly trimmed, his dark overcoat expensive enough to pay a family's rent for a year. Beside him sat Lydia, his wife, her manicured hand resting on a designer purse, her lips twisted in satisfaction. From another car stepped Charlotte, Garrett's younger sister, petite, blonde, and perpetually discontented, her perfume lingering even in the wind. Roderick raised his voice, loud enough for Elena to hear. "Our dear sister-in-law's grand inheritance," he announced, spreading his arms dramatically toward the dilapidated cabin behind her. "Behold the Carter legacy." Laughter followed, sharp and cruel. "A $1 cabin in the snow. Maybe she can rent it to tourists. 50 cents a night if she throws in the dog." Elena's jaw tightened, her cheeks flushed not from the cold but from humiliation. Tommy pressed closer to her leg, confused by their mockery. She wanted to shout, to tell them that Garrett had been worth more than their empty wealth, but grief had stolen her voice long ago. Roderick clapped his gloved hands together. "Well, time to go. The lawyers have handled everything. The cabin's yours, Elena. Enjoy your kingdom, Queen of the North." He winked before sliding into his SUV. The convoy of vehicles rolled down the icy road, their laughter fading into the distance until only the wind remained. Elena stood in the silence they left behind. The cabin loomed before her, a crooked structure of weathered logs, its roof sagging under decades of snow. One shutter dangled from a single hinge, tapping against the wall with each gust. It smelled of sap and rot and memory. She felt Tommy's small hand tug at her sleeve. "Mama," he whispered, pointing through the mist. "Who lived here before us?" "I don't know," she said quietly, "but now it's us." Pushing open the door, she stepped inside. The hinges shrieked like something alive. The air was stale, thick with dust. A broken chair lay on its side near a stone fireplace blackened with soot. She set Iris's carrier down carefully, then brushed her gloved hand over the mantel where cobwebs hung like lace. "We'll clean it up," she said, half to herself. Valor trotted in first, circling the room, sniffing every corner. When he finally lay down by the door, his body stretched protectively across the entrance, Elena felt an odd comfort. She gathered old logs from a pile outside and started a fire. It caught slowly, spitting and crackling until a faint warmth filled the space. Tommy began exploring, picking up discarded jars and old tools, his curiosity pushing back his fear. "Mama," he said after a while, "it's not that bad. I think we can fix it." Elena smiled faintly. "That's my boy." She hadn't smiled like that in months. For a fleeting second, she felt the echo of who she'd once been, a woman who believed in beginnings. When night fell, the world outside turned ghostly white. Snow battered the windows. Elena spread their sleeping bags near the fire, fed Iris, and hummed an old lullaby Garrett used to sing. The baby's eyelids fluttered shut. Tommy yawned, curling beside the dog. Elena sat watching the flames dance, her mind restless. The wind howled against the cabin walls, and for a moment she thought she heard voices, laughter, footsteps, whispers carried by the storm. She shook her head. Just the wind, she told herself, just the wind. But Valor didn't think so. His ears twitched. He rose silently, muscles taut, nose lifted toward the floorboards beneath the fireplace. A deep growl rumbled in his throat. Elena frowned. "What is it, boy?" she whispered. Valor took a slow step forward, claws clicking against the wood, eyes locked on a single spot where the planks looked slightly newer than the rest. The firelight flickered over them, and for the briefest second, she thought she heard it too, something shifting below, faint and deliberate. Her pulse quickened. She pulled Tommy closer, heart pounding as Valor stood rigid, growl deepening. Outside, the wind wailed through the trees, rattling the loose shutter like a warning. Elena's breath caught. "Valor," she whispered, barely audible. "What's under there?" And in that moment, a single hollow thud echoed from beneath the floor. Valor barked once, sharp, alert, ready. The sound was not of settling wood. It was footsteps. The wind had gone still by morning, as if the storm itself were holding its breath. The cabin sat silent under a crust of ice, its windows fogged with frost and secrets. Elena stood in the center of the main room, one hand gripping a rusted crowbar she'd found in the shed. Her breath rose in white plumes as she stared at the floorboards that had disturbed Valor through the night. Tommy sat near the fire, clutching his mug of lukewarm cocoa, his eyes fixed on his mother with a mixture of curiosity and unease. Baby Iris slept soundly in a pile of blankets near the hearth, the only soft warmth in the freezing room. Valor paced in slow circles, tail stiff, his nose pressed to the same spot again and again, ears twitching as though he could hear something beneath the wood that no human ear could. Elena's palms were slick despite the cold. She crouched, running her fingers over the seams of the newer planks. They didn't match the rest of the floor. Different grain, different nails. Someone had replaced them long ago, with deliberate care. She exhaled and whispered to herself, "All right, let's see what you've been hiding." With a groan, she jammed the crowbar between two boards. The wood resisted for a moment, then split with a sharp crack. A rush of icy air escaped like the exhale of the earth. The smell that followed was strange. Ancient dust, stone, and the faint trace of oil or wax, something preserved through time. Valor stiffened, hackles rising. Tommy leaned forward. "Mama, what is it?" "Stay there," she said quickly. "Keep Iris close." She pried up another plank and another until an opening wide enough to peer through yawned before her. Beneath the cabin was darkness, deep, solid, and unnatural. She aimed her flashlight into the void. Light spilled over rough stone steps that descended into shadow. Her heart hammered. "A staircase," she murmured, "built into the ground." Tommy edged closer, curiosity winning over fear. Who would build stairs under a cabin? Elena didn't answer. Valor was already standing at the edge, nose twitching. He gave a low whine, then looked up at her, waiting. "You want to go down, don't you?" she whispered. The dog wagged his tail once, his breath clouding in the beam of the flashlight. Elena secured Iris in her sling, pulling her coat tight around the baby. She turned to Tommy, placing both hands on his small shoulders. "Listen to me, sweetheart. Stay behind me. If I tell you to go back, you go. No questions. Understand?" Tommy nodded solemnly. His face was pale, but his jaw was set with a kind of bravery that reminded her of Garrett. "Yes, Mama." The stairs were slick and cold beneath her boots. Valor led the way, his claws tapping against the stone. The deeper they went, the less she could hear the wind outside. The world narrowed to their breathing and the echo of their footsteps. After 17 steps, the stairwell opened into a vaulted chamber carved from solid rock. Elena swung the flashlight slowly across the walls. Time had made them uneven, but still visible were carved symbols, ravens with outstretched wings, crowns, and Latin words she could barely decipher. The beam caught a tarnished shield mounted high above the far wall, and beneath it, a single line of text etched into the stone. Veritas sub terra. Truth beneath the earth. In the center of the chamber stood a chest made of dark wood bound with silver bands, the metal dull with age but still intact. It rested on a stone pedestal carved with vines and talons. Dust coated everything except the chest. It looked too clean, as though it had been touched recently. Tommy whispered, "It's like something from one of my history books." His voice trembled with awe. Elena's fingers shook as she brushed snowflakes from her coat. "Maybe older than anything in your books," she said softly. She felt a strange pull toward the chest, a hum in the air like static. Valor sniffed the ground, moving around the pedestal in slow, deliberate circles. His tail lowered, body tense but not fearful, alert. Elena knelt, tracing the carvings on the lid. They weren't random marks. They told a story: crowns, swords, and what looked like a family crest, a raven clutching a ring in its beak. She swallowed hard, then eased her fingers beneath the latch. To her surprise, it opened easily. The lid lifted with a sigh, revealing bundles of leather-wrapped parchment and an envelope sealed with wax, brittle but unbroken. Elena lifted one document, its script ornate and faded. Across the top, in perfect calligraphy, read, "By order of King Richard II." Her breath caught. This can't be real. Tommy leaned in, eyes wide. "Who's King Richard?" "Someone who lived hundreds of years ago," she whispered. She unfolded another parchment, maps, property deeds, all bearing the same raven seal. And beneath them, something that made her hands freeze, an envelope addressed in familiar handwriting, "To my beloved Elena." Her throat tightened. The handwriting was unmistakable, Garrett's, firm and slanted, the way he always wrote his name when signing letters from deployment. Tears stung her eyes as she broke the seal with trembling fingers. "My darling Elena," the letter began, "if you're reading this, it means you've found what they could never see. They laughed when I told them our family's history mattered, but beneath their greed lies our truth. My grandfather kept the secret of Ravenshield for generations, hiding the proof here when he left England after the war. The others only saw land and money. You must protect what's ours, for Tommy, for Iris, for the blood that runs in them, and trust Valor. He knows more than anyone where safety lies." Her vision blurred. She pressed the letter to her chest, shoulders shaking. Tommy reached out, his small hand resting on hers. "Dad left that. For you?" She nodded wordlessly. Valor sat beside her, head resting against her leg as if sharing her grief. The dog's warmth steadied her trembling. For the first time since Garrett's death, the tears that came were not just of sorrow, but of understanding. Garrett had planned this, left a trail, a legacy hidden beneath humiliation. Then, from somewhere deeper within the stone walls, came a faint metallic sound, a distant clink, like chain brushing against rock. Valor's head snapped up, his ears flicked forward. He gave a low, warning growl that echoed through the chamber. Elena froze, flashlight beam trembling. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. Tommy nodded, gripping her coat sleeve. "Mama, is someone down here?" She turned toward the darkness beyond the chest, where the beam barely reached a narrow corridor that disappeared into the stone. The air shifted, cooler, alive. Valor stepped forward, hackles rising, tail stiff as a rod. "Elena." Tommy whispered, his voice shaking. Maybe we should go back. She hesitated, torn between reason and the pull of discovery. Garrett's letter had mentioned Valor knowing where safety lies. Maybe this was what he meant, or maybe it was a warning. The metallic sound came again, closer this time, a slow drag, like iron scraping stone. Valor barked once, sharp and commanding, echoing off the walls. The baby stirred in her sling, whimpering. Elena steadied her breath, gripping the flashlight like a weapon. "We're not alone," she whispered. "Stay behind me." She took one cautious step toward the corridor. The light caught something glinting in the dark, something wet and faintly red smeared along the wall. Valor growled again, low and dangerous. And then, from somewhere in the shadows, a whisper drifted up the stairs behind them, soft, unfamiliar, and human. The storm returned before dawn, sweeping through the valley like a white beast hungry for sound. Snow hammered against the cabin walls, hissing through every crack. Inside, the fire had died to embers, and the air was heavy with smoke and fear. Elena sat on the floor beside the open trapdoor, the letter from Garrett still clutched in her shaking hand. She had not slept. Her gray-green eyes, usually distant but calm, were now raw with exhaustion and the echo of the whisper that had drifted up from the dark hours earlier. She kept replaying it in her mind, the faint syllables, almost human, too clear to be wind. Tommy lay curled under a blanket near the fire, his arm draped protectively over baby Iris. He'd insisted on staying up, but sometime near dawn, his small body had given in to sleep. Valor sat upright beside the trapdoor, staring down into the blackness with unblinking intensity. His fur bristled each time the wind moaned outside, and occasionally he would let out a low growl, not of fear, but of warning. When daylight finally pierced through the frosted windows, Elena rose, her body aching. She needed to know what was beneath them, but not with the children here. The responsibility weighed on her shoulders like armor. She looked at Valor, who met her gaze with the same steady intelligence Garrett once had when facing something unknown. "We'll come back," she whispered, "but not today." By afternoon, the storm had softened to flurries. The world outside was blinding white, the kind of cold that felt clean. Elena decided to walk to town, a small place called Snowfield Junction, 20 miles east. They needed food, batteries, and answers. She bundled Iris in thick blankets and zipped Tommy's jacket up to his chin. "Stay close to me, no running ahead," she warned. Tommy nodded, though his curiosity about the secret stairway still lingered in his eyes. "What if someone's still down there, Mama?" "Then they'll wait," she said softly, but her mind echoed a darker thought. Or they won't. The road into town was half buried in snow. Valor led the way, paws silent against the powder, his nose constantly working the air. The landscape rolled in waves of white hills and frozen pines, endless and empty. After nearly 2 hours of trudging through silence, the first buildings appeared, a gas station, a diner, and a row of small shops with faded signs. They stopped at the Snowfield General Store, a narrow place that smelled of dust and kerosene. Behind the counter stood a man in his early 50s, tall, thin, with the leathery face of someone who'd lived his whole life in the cold. His beard was gray and uneven, his hands rough. His name tag read, Henry Voss. His deep-set eyes regarded Elena and the children with mild curiosity, but when he saw Valor, his expression tightened for a moment, recognition perhaps, or discomfort. "Afternoon," he said, voice hoarse from years of cigarettes. "Don't see many folks this far out in weather like this." Elena gave a polite nod, brushing snow from her coat. "We just moved into the old Carter cabin on Ridge Road." Henry paused mid-scan of a can of coffee, the beeping sound loud in the silence. "That place," he said slowly. "You bought that cabin?" "It was part of the family estate," Elena replied carefully. "My husband's family owned it." Henry's eyes flicked to the window, where snow drifted against the glass. "You mean Garrett Carter's folks?" He leaned slightly on the counter, lowering his voice. "You might want to be careful in that cabin, ma'am. Old things up there don't always stay buried." Elena frowned. "What do you mean?" He shrugged, glancing toward Tommy as if to avoid scaring the boy. "There's talk, that's all. Back in the 60s, some surveyors found stonework beneath the property. Old tunnels, maybe. County sealed them off after a cave-in, said it was unsafe. But some say those tunnels went deeper, real deep. Valor gave a short, low bark as if responding. Henry stepped back slightly, forcing a nervous chuckle. "That's one sharp dog you've got there." "He was my husband's," Elena said softly. "He's trained." Henry's gaze softened just a little. "Well, if you need anything, I'm here most days. And if you start hearing things at night—" He trailed off, then added, "Just make sure your doors are locked tight." Back outside, the air bit harder. Elena could still hear his words in her head. Old things up there don't always stay buried. They made it home by dusk. The cabin was quiet, the snow piled nearly to the windowsills. As soon as they stepped inside, Valor went straight to the trapdoor and sniffed. He growled once, then sat staring at it. Elena knelt beside him, her fingers brushing his collar. "You feel it too, don't you?" she whispered. The dog didn't move, his gaze locked downward. After the children were asleep, she lit a lantern and unfolded Garrett's letter again. Her eyes lingered on the final line. "Trust Valor. He knows where safety lies." She turned the paper over and noticed faint writing on the back she hadn't seen before, almost erased by time. "If you find the ravens, follow them. They will lead you home." "Ravens," she whispered. She remembered the carvings in the chamber, the ravens with their wings outstretched, the crown between them. She also remembered something Henry had said about tunnels going deeper. What if the carvings were not just symbols, but markers? Valor suddenly lifted his head, ears pricked. His body went rigid, nostrils flaring. The hairs along his spine stood up. Then came the sound again. Faint but distinct, the same dragging of metal from below. Elena froze, lantern trembling in her hand. She could hear it this time, too. It was not wind, not shifting wood. It was movement. Slow, deliberate, as though someone or something was dragging a chain across stone. Valor began to growl, the deep rumble of a soldier preparing for battle. He padded to the trapdoor and pressed his nose against it, barking once, sharply. Elena whispered, "Stay back." But Valor ignored her. He was locked onto something. The noise stopped. Silence stretched, so long and heavy that even the wind seemed to hold still outside. Then, from the other side of the floorboards, came a single knock. Elena's breath caught. It wasn't random. It was rhythmic. 3 short taps, a pause, then one long. Tommy stirred in his sleep, mumbling, but didn't wake. Elena leaned forward, whispering, "Who's there?" No reply, only the creak of the cabin settling in the cold. Valor snarled, claws scraping the wood. His body was tense, his tail straight out, every muscle alert. Then, without warning, he lunged at the door, barking furiously. The sound echoed through the cabin, shaking dust from the rafters. And then, silence again. Elena forced herself to breathe. "It's over," she whispered, though her voice lacked conviction. She pulled Valor back by the collar, shutting the trapdoor tight and sliding a heavy chest over it. Hours later, she sat by the fire, Iris asleep in her lap, Valor stretched beside her, his head resting on her knee. Outside, the wind began to rise again, carrying with it a distant sound that could almost have been wings. She closed her eyes, whispering to herself, "If you find the ravens." And from deep below, almost imperceptible but real, came an answering whisper, a woman's voice, soft and sorrowful, calling her name. "Elena." The fire flickered once and went out. The storm had thinned into a pale fog that clung to the trees like ghosts that refused to leave. Morning light seeped weakly through the frost-covered windows of the cabin, painting the walls in shades of gray and silence. Elena hadn't slept. The whisper calling her name still echoed inside her skull, soft, feminine, and impossibly close. It hadn't been a dream. Valor had heard it too. He now lay by the door, his muzzle resting on his paws, but his golden eyes never strayed far from the trapdoor. Every so often, his ears twitched toward the floor as if he expected that voice to rise again. Tommy sat near the fire, trying to draw in his notebook, clumsy sketches of ravens and stairways, his attempt to make sense of what his young mind couldn't explain. "Mama," he said quietly, "what if the voice is someone trapped down there?" Elena stirred from her thoughts. She looked at her son, then back at the sealed door. "If it is," she said softly, "we'll find out when the time's right." But deep down, she knew no one could survive in that chamber, not for centuries. By noon, the fog thickened outside until the forest vanished completely. Elena gathered the children close, her unease growing. Valor began pacing again, restless, protective. Then, suddenly, he froze, nose pressed to the door, body stiff as stone. A moment later, 3 faint knocks sounded from beneath the floor, slow, deliberate, the same rhythm as before. Elena's pulse spiked. She grabbed the lantern, her breath coming quick. "Tommy, take Iris into the bedroom," she whispered. "Lock the door and don't open it until I say." Tommy hesitated. "But Mama—" "Now." The boy obeyed, clutching the baby and disappearing into the back room. When the latch clicked, Elena turned back to the trapdoor. Valor stood beside her, hackles raised, teeth barely bared. His low growl vibrated in the air like a warning drum. Elena pulled the chest away from the trapdoor. The wood beneath her fingers felt colder than the air. She lifted it slowly, the hinges creaking. Warm air from the room met the freezing breath from below. "Hello?" she called. No answer. Only the faint smell of stone and old air. Then came the whisper again, closer this time. "Elena." She nearly dropped the lantern. The voice was unmistakably human, female, and filled with sorrow. "Who are you?" Elena demanded, leaning over the dark stairway. "What do you want?" A pause, then, "The truth was never buried, only forgotten." Valor barked once, sharp, echoing off the walls. The flame in the lantern flickered violently. "Show yourself," Elena shouted, but there was only silence until she heard something new, the faint scraping of metal against stone, and then, impossibly, movement. A faint figure emerged in the darkness below, faintly visible in the shifting light. Not solid, but not entirely air either. It took the vague shape of a woman draped in mist, her face hidden by shadow. Elena stumbled backward. Valor planted himself between her and the stairs, barking fiercely. The apparition lifted her head, her voice no louder than breath. "Ravenshield, the blood still flows." The sound of the name froze Elena where she stood. "Ravenshield?" she whispered, that same word carved into the walls below. "You're one of them." The figure tilted its head. "The last to guard the truth, the one who sealed the vault. You must finish what was begun, before the others find it." "Elena." The voice wavered, breaking apart like wind through glass. "They will come for what is theirs. The blood calls to blood." Before Elena could speak again, the figure dissolved into a swirl of mist that sank back down the stairway. The cold air surged upward, snuffing the lantern flame completely. For a long time there was only the crackle of the dying fire and the steady sound of Valor's breathing. He sniffed the air once, then pressed his head against Elena's leg as if to reassure her that she was still here, still real. Hours passed before Tommy dared to emerge from the bedroom. His eyes were wide, his small hands clutching Iris close. "Mama, I heard someone talking. Who was it?" Elena knelt to his level, her voice gentle but trembling. "I don't know, sweetheart, but I think she's been waiting a very long time." That night, Elena sat by the window, staring out into the fog-drenched valley. The storm had ended, but the world felt heavier, as though something beneath the snow had awakened. She unfolded Garrett's letter again, tracing the final line with her finger. "Trust Valor. He knows where safety lies." She looked down at the dog, now asleep by the fire, his chest rising steadily. The scars on his ear caught the glow of the embers, reminders of battles fought beside Garrett years ago. Maybe Valor's loyalty wasn't just instinct. Maybe he was tied to this place in ways she couldn't yet understand. Then, through the window, she saw them, black shapes circling above the tree line. Ravens, at least a dozen, gliding in eerie silence against the pale sky. They weren't there before. Elena stood slowly, the letter trembling in her hand. In the distance, past the fog, she saw something faint. The silhouette of tall spires jutting through the clouds, the outline of a castle perched on the far ridge. She'd never noticed it before, hidden behind the storm. The ravens circled once more, then flew toward it, vanishing into the mist. Elena whispered to herself, If you find the ravens, follow them. Valor lifted his head and whined softly, as if in agreement. The fire popped in the hearth, sending a shower of sparks upward. Elena turned to her children's room. They were safe, for now. But she knew that whatever haunted the tunnels had only just begun to stir. And beyond the valley, in that distant castle, lay the answers Garrett had died protecting. The next morning, when she opened the door, Valor was already standing outside, snowflakes catching on his dark coat, eyes fixed toward the ridge where the castle had appeared. His tail wagged once. He was waiting. Elena tightened her scarf and whispered, "All right, boy, we'll follow." Behind them, deep beneath the cabin floor, came a sound like a sigh, as though something ancient had finally been released. The morning broke clear for the first time in weeks. The mountains shimmered under the pale gold of the winter sun, and the storm that had haunted the valley was gone. Elena stood at the edge of the ridge, Valor by her side, the wind tugging at her dark hair. Tommy held her hand while little Iris slept in the sling across her chest. Ahead of them, rising from the mist like something half-remembered from a dream, was the castle, Ravenshield Keep. It was vast, ancient, and hauntingly beautiful. Turrets and spires stretched skyward, their frost-coated stones glowing faintly in the light. Ravens circled the highest tower, their cries echoing across the valley. Valor gave a soft bark, tail wagging as if he recognized the place. They crossed the final stretch of snow and reached the great gate. The massive wooden doors creaked open on their own, slow and solemn. Inside, silence reigned, the kind of silence that held memory. The grand hall stretched before them, lined with tattered banners bearing the crowned raven. At the far end stood a stone monument, a sarcophagus engraved with the same Latin words carved on the chest below the cabin, Veritas sub terra. Elena stepped closer, her breath clouding in the cold air. Garrett's letter burned in her pocket like a heartbeat. She placed it on the stone lid, whispering, "You were right. The truth was never buried." As she spoke, a soft rumble rolled through the hall. Valor lifted his head, ears pricked, and then, from the walls, the faint glow of light spread like dawn through stained glass. Symbols ignited one by one, illuminating murals long faded by time. They showed knights kneeling before a crowned raven, a woman holding a newborn, a wolf at her feet, and last, a soldier returning home with a loyal dog by his side. Tears welled in Elena's eyes. She understood now. The bloodline of Ravenshield had never vanished. It had only crossed the ocean and changed its name. Garrett had known. He had left her the key not just to the castle, but to their family's truth. Tommy tugged her sleeve, eyes wide. "Mama, look!" At the base of the sarcophagus, a small stone compartment slid open. Inside lay a book bound in dark leather, its pages edged with silver. On the cover was embossed a single raven's feather. Elena opened it carefully. Inside were names, centuries of them, tracing the family tree all the way to her husband's. And at the very bottom, written in Garrett's handwriting, was one last line. "The Ravenshield blood endures through faith, courage, and love. Protect the light, and it will protect you." Elena pressed her hand over the words, her tears falling freely now. She turned to Valor, who stood tall beside her, chest heaving, eyes bright. "We did it, boy," she whispered. "You brought us home." The great hall seemed to breathe around them. A gust of warm air flowed through the corridor, stirring the banners. Above, the ravens cawed, circling once, before flying out into the sun. The curse, or whatever sorrow had lingered here, was gone. Weeks later, the valley no longer felt haunted. Workers from Snowfield Junction helped restore the castle, turning it into a sanctuary, part museum, part refuge for families who had nowhere else to go. Elena managed the estate with quiet strength, her once weary eyes now alight with purpose. Tommy went to the village school and often brought friends to meet Sir Valor, who had become a local legend. Every night when the fire glowed in the great hearth, Elena would read Garrett's letter aloud to her children, a reminder of where they came from and how love could survive even through centuries of snow. Valor always lay at her feet, old now but proud, his gray muzzle resting on her lap, eyes closing to the sound of her voice. On the final night of that winter, as the ravens roosted on the castle walls and moonlight poured through the windows, Elena looked out across the valley, toward the small cabin where it all began. A single light still burned there, as if keeping watch. She smiled, whispering into the quiet, "We're home now." And somewhere in the stillness, carried by the wind, came Garrett's voice, soft, proud, and eternal. "You kept your promise." Valor lifted his head once more, as if hearing it too, then rested peacefully. The snow kept falling, not cold now, but gentle, like a benediction over the valley of Ravenshield reborn. Sometimes miracles do not arrive with thunder or angels. They come quietly, through loyalty, love, and the courage to keep believing when the world has gone cold. Elena didn't just inherit a castle. She inherited proof that faith still moves mountains, and that even in the darkest winter, God leaves a light to guide us home. If you're watching this, remember, your own $1 cabin, that moment of humiliation, loss, or despair, might just be the beginning of your greatest blessing. Miracles aren't found in gold or titles. They're found in hearts that refuse to give up. May God bless you and everyone you love. May He give you strength in your storms, warmth in your winters, and light in every night you walk through. Before you go, if you believe that loyalty, love, and faith can still change the world, click subscribe, leave a comment telling us where you're watching from, and share this story with someone who needs hope tonight. Because miracles don't end when the credits roll. They begin when hearts like yours choose to believe again.